Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you choose to read your clock, this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this early morning or middle of the night bonus upload, shall we?
Today's first terrifying experience. This happened on August 12th of 2020. I scribbled down as many details as I could on a scrap piece of paper in my car. I wanted to try and get my experience down while it was still fresh in my mind. Anyway, I had taken a drive up through Wyoming and then took Mirror Lake Scenic Byway back down into Utah. My grandmother had passed away a week prior and I needed some time to clear my head, which I often do with a drive. Mirror Lake Highway is beautiful, and being a Wednesday, it wasn't crowded at all, so I could take my time and enjoy it. One of the pull-offs on the road is the Slate Gorge overlook. There's a short trail that leads you to the overlook, and then you can look down into the gorge. It's not super big, and see the Provo River. No one was there, so I took a seat and let my mind wander a bit. You can sort of get an idea of what it looks like if you Google it. I'd been there for maybe 20 minutes or so when I saw something come out from behind the trees. I was excited, thinking maybe it was a moose or an elk, and I've always wanted to see one of those. But what appeared was what looked like a hunched-over person that was sort of half walking, half crawling rather slowly. While that in itself was weird, it was even stranger that it looked like a person wearing a really heavy, crudely fashioned gray fur coat with a hood, but one that was several sizes too small for them. It also looked like part of them, like they had fur themselves, but that really didn't make sense. It was also around 80 out, with temps clipping 100 in the valley, so it was not cold by any means. While the sides are kind of steep, you can get down into the gorge without too much of an issue. I kind of thought maybe someone was doing a TikTok video or something like that, but I didn't see anyone else around filming. Eventually, whatever it was made it to the water and stuck its head in and got a drink. As it looked like it was finishing, a group of people were coming up on the overlook. They had kids with them who were making a bunch of noise. It can echo through the gorge a bit, and this creature/person heard it and took off incredibly fast on all fours over pretty uneven ground. Now, I'm not sure what I saw. In all likelihood, it could have been a person getting in touch with nature and wearing some homemade costume, but the way they moved seemed unnaturally human, especially when the noise spooked it and it took off running. I'm sort of conflicted between a person in a fur suit and a possible dogman. Both seem plausible, and I don't really want to immediately jump to conclusions on what it could be. I've always been into Sasquatch and such, and it didn't remind me of anything Bigfoot related I'd ever seen. So I pretty much ruled that out, but otherwise, I don't know. I wish I would have thought to bring my phone with me so I could have snapped a photo, but I left it in the center console since I didn't want it going off and spoiling my quiet time. Today's second terrifying experience. In the fall of 1980, I had ran a small business as a construction contractor in Eugene, Oregon. During the slow times and in between jobs, I would don on my backpack and hiking boots and disappear into the mountains for weeks at a time, enjoying the peaceful solitude of long hikes. At that time, I was single and didn't answer to anyone, so I was free to do what I wanted when I wanted. On the trip in question, I decided to hike to Old Molalla Indian Trail that followed the ridge tops from Saddle Blanket Mountain to Oak Ridge, one of the Native Americans' favorite summer camps and trading centers. It was a beautiful August day. 2 days into the hike, I expected to be gone for a couple weeks, when literally out of the blue, the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me in my life occurred. It would change my perspective of reality forever. I was walking along the trail, enjoying the strong breeze and bright sunshine, when, in the middle of a step, everything around me started to turn gray and blurry. The only way I can describe it was if suddenly I was looking through someone else's prescription sunglasses. I finished the step and started another. Every inch I moved forward, the darkness increased, and the gray blurring turned into a jumble of shapes that made no sense. I then seemed to pass a barrier, and everything started to return back into focus when my foot reached the ground on the second step. Everything around me had changed. Day had turned into night. There was no wind. All the Douglas fir and pine trees had been replaced with thick jungle-like growth. The cool, thin mountain air was replaced with humid, thick air. There were no stars in the sky, but there was a diffused light that let me see everything clearly. However, I couldn't tell what the light source was. As often happens when the human body receives a massive dose of adrenaline, the entire incident appeared like it was in slow motion. And even though I was only there for a second or two, I had time to observe my surroundings. The silence was broken by a continuous high-pitched keening sound, and I was nearly overwhelmed with a sense of fear and danger. My momentum caused me to take one more step before stopping in my tracks. It was at this point I heard a whisper, "Gotcha," over my right shoulder. I couldn't tell if I had heard it with my ears or inside of my head. The word wasn't directed at me, but something said the word quietly to itself. I was so terrified I actually felt my heart stop for a moment. That whispered word is what saved me. I opened my mouth and gasped in a huge gush of thick air and recoiled backward in the same footsteps I had entered wherever I was. As I threw myself backward, I looked over my right shoulder. A dark-colored, hairy right hand and arm was reaching for my throat over my shoulder. The hand had pale ivory spade-shaped fingernails. The nails looked clean and almost had a manicured look to them. The thumb was placed lower towards the wrist on the hand than a human's is. Both hands and arms were thin and powerful looking, and both covered in thick, coarse black fur. I got a good look at it because the thumbnail grazed my neck. It didn't break skin as I moved backward. As I continued backward, the hand clutched where my neck had been a split second before, and it seemed to fade off into the distance as I returned through the portal. I took 2 more steps backward, and everything reversed itself from what had just happened. The world around me became lighter. The fir and pines gradually came back into view, and by the 3rd step I was back on Saddle Blanket Mountain. I continued to move backward in terror, and as I did, I observed that where I had just come from was a shimmering oval patch in the air, about the size of a large door. The woods behind it looked like they were under water. By the 5th backward step, the shimmering area seemed to just evaporate, and everything was back to normal. By then, my lungs had nearly burst from the volume of air I had inhaled during the huge gasp I had just taken. My body felt like it was on fire from the adrenaline surge. I spun around and ran back down the trail as fast as my legs would carry me, and I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I spent nearly 2 days getting to that place, and about 3 hours getting back. On my way home, I was absolutely horrified at the thought of what had just happened. If I were to drive my truck into something like that, it had been a trap, pure and simple. Whatever it was that tried to kill me somehow kept that portal hidden from me on the way in, and I didn't actually see it until I was back out again. I've had horrible nightmares for years and still haven't come to grips with what happened. My fingers are trembling and the hair is standing on my nape of my neck as I write this down to share with you all. Today's third terrifying experience. This happened to myself and a buddy when I was in college during the winter of 2010. I was, and still am, an outdoorsy guy who has been home in the woods for a very long time. I've seen and heard a lot, but never experienced anything like this. I had met my buddy at college the first semester, and we became fast friends. Before I knew it, he was inviting me back to his family's place that winter to stay there and do a bit of hog hunting. I've hunted hogs since I was old enough to hunt, so I jumped at the chance. We got to his parents' place, and holy hell, it was beautiful. They own about 1,500 acres out in rural West Texas. His family raises, shows, and sells cattle. They're loaded. They're amazing people, and they kind of took me in as a second son. Over my time at college, I was visiting them a lot, but since his family are avid hunters, and the land they live on is mainly for their cattle, they own another 1,000 acres they lease to hunters and also use themselves to hunt on. So, after a day or two at their primary ranch, we set out to the hunting lease. It was just my buddy and I. No hunters had leased it for the winter yet. We set our stuff up at this little hunting cabin they had, set our alarms to wake up at 6 a.m. We got some rest and woke up, ready to get out to the stand. Us being wild college kids, we brought the whiskey and coke and our rifles. Spare me the lectures. We were stupid college kids. We got to the stand after a short hike through the cold and hopped up onto the stand. It was one of those big green metal stands that's elevated about 15 to 20 feet in the air. The area it's set up facing was perfect. To the left, about 100 yards, was a mostly cliché rock clearing with trees lining it and dead cactus. In front of us was a wider clearing with sparse trees and various weeds and grass. To the right was a decently dense patch of trees. Behind us was a dense patch of trees and a high fence about 30 yards back. We could not see behind us because the blind we were in was only a 180-degree view. Just the back wall and a door with a window that was boarded up because the glass or whatever had been broken. We just set up the chairs, started drinking and waiting. We had a beautiful view of the area and the sunrise coming from the east of where we were. We didn't see anything the first hour, so we just kept drinking and chatting. About an hour after the sun rose, we started hearing some limbs break and brush rustle from behind us. Sounded a good ways back, maybe 50 yards or so. We readied our rifles, hoping that what we were certain were hogs would circle around us. I remember sitting there just waiting, watching the fog from my breath for a good 5 minutes, the rustling getting closer. Then I noticed a really metallic smell. The best way I can describe it is that smell crappy tools give off when you don't take care of them, kind of like a mix of copper, vomit, and poop. I looked at my bud and whispered, "You smell that?" He nodded and shrugged his shoulders. A minute later, we're still waiting. The rustling seemed to be getting closer. Then it just kind of stopped after a couple of minutes. I could still smell the stink, but no noise, and figured maybe a couple of hogs had taken a dump near the stand and moved on. I reached to pick up the bottle as my buddy puts his rifle down, and just as we were doing that, we heard a scream/grunt. I have never heard anything like it. It was like a low grunt that escalated into a gravelly scream, and it sounded like it was right outside the back of the blind. Before we could even really react, we heard a bunch of twigs and branches snapping. Sounded like it was right outside the back of the blind. Not a couple seconds after, we feel the entire blind shake about 3 times, like if a car had bumped it. I dropped the bottle of whiskey and looked at my friend, and he looked just as freaked as I was. We heard a loud, singular grunt, and then the sound of twigs and branches breaking again, slowly getting quieter. We just sat there, too freaked out to move for what felt like an hour, but was really only 10 minutes. I don't know if it was the whiskey or just me trying to be brave, but I got up and opened the door. There was nothing there. We climbed down and had our rifles at the ready. We both knew it was not a hog, but tried to convince ourselves that it was. We could see the old stand marks on the ground, and the whole stand had rocked forward about 6 inches. There was a bent portion of one of the metal struts and 2 big depressions where it looked like feet had dug into the rocky ground. We figured whatever it was stood there while it was rocking the stand. We stood there looking dumbfounded, and we just decided to get the hell out of there. We drove back to the main house and told his dad. He said to just stay at their house with them for the night, and we'll go check it out in the morning. When we got there the day after, we saw the same things that were there the day prior, and his dad was super confused. I don't think he initially believed us when we told him about what had happened. We found where whatever had come from. There was a clear path in the grass leading away from the stand, where it had been depressed, and you could see broken tree limbs. The highest one was broken off about 7 feet from the ground. We walked back 30 yards to the high fence that was there, and sure enough, about 4-foot wide section had been mangled and bent down. His dad was pissed, obviously, but he was also really confused. He told us that he had never had this happen, and reckons it was a giant hog, but I never thought so. I don't really want to say it was Bigfoot, Dogman, or whatever, but I've never had an explanation as to what could have caused this. Over the years, I've grown to believe in cryptids more and more. My dad had an encounter with what he claims was a Bigfoot. As well, so many, it runs in the family. Today's 4th experience. I'd been asked to share this, so here goes. Back in 1989, I was with my boyfriend, Eddie, his best friend, my older sister, Angie, and about 6 other people. We'd spent the entire day mudding in the Royal Palms mudflats in Royal Palm Beach, Florida, a.k.a. part of Palm Beach County. I grew up in West Palm Beach. I had never seen anything like this before or since. After mudding all day, we decided to call it a night and leave. Almost everyone was gone by then, so we all piled into Eddie's truck and left. Eddie saw a small mud hole and drove through it as one last hurrah for the night. We got stuck. That small mud hole was deceptive. When I say we got stuck, I mean we were stuck for hours. I was pregnant with my first, so I was steering as the other 9 were pushing. The truck didn't budge. We had no choice but to wait until morning for someone to come and pull us out, as we were on our own now. At about 5 in the morning, we decided we should just relax and try to sleep until someone came through. Eddie, I, and his bestie were in the front. My sister and the other 6, who we are all still friends with to this day, piled in the back and started to settle down. We were still making noise when I heard a sound. It was a rumbling growl. I knew immediately that it was some type of animal. I told everyone to hush and listen. Then we heard it, and it was getting louder, more aggressive. Eddie has a KC light behind his seat. He popped out, grabbed it, plugged it in, and lit up the night around. That's when our world changed. 10 of us had our world rocked in a way we had never expected. This thing ducked down and moved. Everyone was starting to freak out because it was clearly there. But what was it? Then it got pissed. This thing stood straight up, let out a roar that I can still hear 31 years later. leapt the large bush it was standing behind and charged us. You could feel the earth literally shake with every running step it took. It was easily 8 to 9 feet tall, broad. It looked extremely large man with fur. It had hair and lots of it. The KC light lit it up, and you could see the clumping of its fur. The smell was rotten and sour. Being pregnant, I was extremely sensitive to smells, and it was bad. We had spent hours, we were talking 5 hours, trying to push this truck out. They say adrenaline gives you super strength. They're right. Eddie turned on his truck and started pushing on his door frame. His bestie leapt out on his side and did the same. My sister and the other 6 let out screams as they piled out. And then all you heard was this thing running and roaring. Everyone else was dead silent as they put everything they had into pushing the truck out. With a sucking pop that I also can still hear, we were out, and they were throwing themselves back into Eddie's truck as Eddie and his bestie jumped in and floored it. This is woods with tight turns, and we flew around those turns. It felt like the devil himself was chasing us. After we got out and onto the main road, we headed for a gas station to calm down and call our families. When we got there, we all got out and sat with our backs to the wall, and that was it. We had never said a word to each other, just silence. I think we were too raw, scared, and in complete shock over what had happened. This was lore. This wasn't real. They don't exist, yet there it was. After we called our parents, we went home, one by one being dropped off. Not a word was spoken. My sister and I did not discuss this until about 5 years ago. We finally opened up about it one night and slowly talked to the others. 25 years after the fact, and every single one of us that have spoken about it have the same exact story and memory forever burned into our memories. It wasn't cool. It was scary. I think the reason we couldn't talk about it for so long was because our brains were in denial at first. And then we didn't know how to open up about it. Now I can look back and say, holy crap, we did see a Bigfoot. And today's final encounter. We lived in a house that had an outhouse in Scott County, Virginia. No toilet. We had running water, but just couldn't get a proper septic system in there. The outhouse was on a hill a ways, about 30 yards. This was in a valley. Nearest neighbor was roughly 4 miles away. Good luck if you needed emergency services. We had 3 dogs. The biggest of all was our lab mix named Boo Bear. I'm going to split this up so it's not a wall of text. Boo was a very loyal and territorial dog. Didn't matter what time of day it was, he'd go with you to the outhouse and sit outside. This was his normal behavior for years. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about him and welling up with tears. He was a damn good dog. One night my mom needed to go and he went with her. We normally just walk out and do our business and head back and go to sleep. We had no AC, just windows and fans. Boo followed my mom up there, and this time he was between mom and the woods. There was a solid tree line around the house that you couldn't see into at all. I've hunted it, but I'd get my ass back in the house before it even got close to dark. Boo felt or heard something. The more my mom tried to get up, and the more he would growl. He had never behaved this way. My mom, a devout Baptist, swears on the Bible that she heard what sounded like grunting coming out of the woods. She could feel something either stamping or punching the ground. Punch a thought of flour. That's how the thud was, and that's what she described. My mom was raised by some serious hillbillies and was not scared of anything in the woods, so she forced her way up there. She thought it was a deer, as they'll do that in rutting season. Boo sat there growling, and she said every hair he had was standing straight up. He wasn't barking. She could feel his growl. Like, I don't know how to describe it, like you feel bass from a subwoofer. She got done and came back down to the house. No other issues that night. A few nights later, I had a friend staying over. It was about 11:30 Friday or Saturday because we had a 10 p.m. bedtime on the weeknights, and we were playing Killer Instinct on my N64. Man, when I said this scared me, I thought my mom was being killed. We heard a scream and felt a noise come from the woods about 150 yards up the mountain. Buddy, I got goosebumps coming up like crazy right now. I didn't say shit. I kept playing, thinking that my brain is playing tricks on me. 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it was maybe 75 to 100 yards up, and it was heading down. I stopped and asked my friend if he heard it, and he said, yeah, I heard it the first time, too. Man, I can describe it. Fight or flight kicked in, and we were in panic mode. I checked on my mom and my little brother, and both were fine. I woke up my little brother and told him what was going on. We grabbed our rifles. I only had a 30-06. My friend had my 20 gauge, and my little brother, he had his 22. We parked our butts in the room we were in when we first had heard it. When I say my heart was racing, if it was doing a 100-meter yard dash, I would have beaten Usain Bolt. We didn't hear a thing for 30 minutes, nothing. We had the windows open due to no AC, and the fans were off. We started to hear a noise coming from the woods, just walking. It sounded like something was slowly plodding down the ridge toward our house. I knew it was not a cat. You will never hear a big cat. I've had cougars surprise me, and I never heard a thing. This was big and making a lot of racket. We just kept sitting there, ears on alert. Scream again. This one shook the windows, literally shook everything. There was nothing at that point we could have done. It was within 25 yards of our house. We were petrified. Boo was pacing back and forth. He wanted out. I didn't want him to go, and neither did my brother or my friend. He was our safety blanket at that moment. We decided just to hang out there, and we started hearing grunting and growling. All I can say is I've heard deer rut. This was way too guttural. This frickin' felt dread come over me. We all started bawling. We legit felt like we were gonna die. My mom finally woke up and came in. She saw us all holding our guns, and she was like, WTF are you doing? I put my hand up to my face. She saw we were crying. I put my index finger to say shh. The grunting and growling kept going, getting louder and louder. Then pounding started. It wasn't hitting a tree or anything. It was hitting the ground, like punching the crap out of it. We could feel the hit. Mom said this was what she had heard the other night, but didn't think too much of it. This was seriously scaring my friend and my brother and me. The grunting and pounding stopped. Mom decided to send Boo out. Nikki and Bella, our other dogs, didn't do anything. Boo was just a badass, and we were his family. That was it. We heard one yelp, and nothing. We didn't hear anything else that night. For several days, it was that way. Boo was gone, and we were all shook up. I think it was 5 or 6 days later, my stepdad went to use the outhouse, and lying next to the building was Boo. I swear on my life that this dog was literally torn apart. He had literally been ripped apart, limb from limb. I don't know what this was. Could have been a bear, I don't know. I know that we moved out of there a month later, and that damn place can't keep people in it anymore. I can't say that I smelled anything or anything like that. The outhouse smelled pretty bad, pretty gnarly anyway. Definitely one of the worst experiences of my life.
And there you have it, folks. A string of just absolutely terrifying experiences, which I hope y'all enjoyed as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives folks like us a chance and a place to share our experiences judgment-free. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. And until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.